welcome to a new webinar on Energy News Biz. Today's topic is commercializing green hydrogen and power-to-X products in South Africa and Africa to achieve effective decarbonization. My name is Arnes Biogradlija and I will be your host today. I hope you'll be satisfied with what you learn here from our speakers. Today's speakers are coming from Cliff Decker Hofmeyr, a full-service law firm with an extensive reach across Africa consisting of more than 350 lawyers and track record spanning over, believe it or not, 169 years. During this webinar, Jackwell Farris, a director and sector head, industrials, manufacturing and trade, will give us an overview in policy, law and commercial considerations of hydrogen in Africa. Margo-Ann Warner, a director in the environmental practice of the corporate and commercial department, will walk us through the commercial side of things in this sector. Their presentations will be combined to maximize the information quality output for our viewers. Mr. Kal'air Trezeguet, who is a chairman of Hydrogen Africa, will take the stage first and tell us more about Hydrogen Africa and its connection to Cliff Decker Hofmeyr. After presentations, we will take some questions. Mr. Trezeguet, please take the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Morning to all our audience. That's actually they're busy bringing us from different parts of the world, from Asia, America, Europe, and Africa, because I can see the audience are there. We're reaching more than 350 people watching us online today. So as I speak myself, I'm Kal'air Trezeguet, the chairman of Hydrogen Africa. Hydrogen Africa, it's a group of association actually that was built to take care or to do the awareness of the African green hydrogens. Our main mission is to bring more investors in Africa. When actually we see the potential of Africa is a key basin or a key hub of producing the green hydrogen, supporting the whole world. So we see on the map, on our geographical map and the African map, I can say, we see who the country have potential to produce when it comes to green hydrogen, when it comes to ammonia, when it comes to the different type of silver and blue and pink. But we see there was actually 9 countries that was actually agreed to work in terms of collaboration when we called actually the Green Hydrogen Africa, that were actually putting the signature in. We're talking about South Africa, Mauritania, Egypt, Namibia, and Morocco. So from there, we say the next step is, who's the people that we need to work together with? We need to look for investors. Where come investors in Europe? It's where our head office is based, in Paris. So we started actually to knock doors from A to Z across Eastern and Central Europe, America, Australia, and Asia, to look for potential investors who are going to Africa, because to tell them actually our climate change, our climate securities, when it comes to finance climate securities are sold, are more better. So we need investors to come put their knowledge, their money to push the green hydrogen, African green hydrogen, to be known across the world. So that's actually, but our focus was, we started with Namibia. We live with Namibia, and then we moved to, now we are based, this year we are based with South Africa. We need to really to see South Africa coming out of the map. We need really to see, because South Africa got all those potential. Because when we're talking about the El Dorado of hydrogen, green hydrogen in Africa, South Africa is #1. But what is the gap? What's missing? So that's why we are here today. So that is this year that Hydrogen Africa say, day and night, we'll work to push South African green hydrogen out of the map, to bring actually investors, more investors into South Africa, because we know exactly what actually the EIB says. The EIB says actually they're putting 1 trillion actually by 2030, by 2035 to actually to sell actually hydrogen capacities actually. So we're going to produce that 50 tons every year. Who's that countries that will produce that 50 tons? We're talking about, we need a proper sustainable, that South Africa are capable to do that. But for us, the key relationship that we have with the CDH, Cliff Decker Hofmeyr's law firms, because we see they're the only law firm actually that are putting day and night their work. Mr. Jackwell's and his team, Margo and the rest, They're working day and night with us, and we're seeing all their project they did when it come, their report they did when it comes to green hydrogen, South Africa and the rest of the continent. They went to Kenya, they went everywhere. So that's exactly Hydrogen Africa looking forward to work with them. So we say you are the guys that actually, when we knock in doors, we know we have our corporate law firms. When it comes to terms and terms, when it comes to law exertions, we know and a CDH of Mayor will be there to support and to tell the investors you are safe and the security of your finance will be there with us. Thank you so much. That's exactly the mission of Hydrogen Africa and the proper awareness to build Africa to be the next El Dorado of green hydrogen, to be the really basin and hub, especially South Africa and the rest of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trezeguet. Now let's listen to Jackwell Farris, a director and sector head, industrials and manufacturing and trade. Jackwell, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Arnes, and thank you, Kal'air, for that introduction. And again, also thank you to Hydrogen Africa. We participated in one of the first conferences in September that was hosted in Sandton with Hydrogen Africa. It was very successful because there was a number of industry players that was here talking about how does Africa ultimately develop its hydrogen industry, and on an integrated basis and a collaborative basis, not just looking at South Africa, but looking at all the different jurisdictions on the continent that can ultimately contribute to that. And maybe an important point to start on from our side is when we look at what has happened and the recap of last year in terms of what happened in 2022 from a hydrogen perspective, and in particular, the last part of 2022 when we talk about COP27. COP27 obviously saw a number of projects and initiatives from a decarbonization perspective was announced during COP26, and those to some extent have been followed through. But COP27 was important in terms of how do we actually make these a reality, because we're all talking about decarbonization, which is important from a global perspective to ensure that we deal not just from an energy perspective, but also from a hard to abate industries that are difficult to abate in terms of they use fossil fuels. And how do you change the use of fossil fuels, petroleum products, oil and gas, and use a more cleaner, sustainable project such as hydrogen in a molecule form for steel production, for cement production, and a number of other industries. So we see there's a bigger emphasis in terms of how do we make this happen from a finance perspective, in terms of making sure the funding is available to make these projects ultimately bankable and feasible. We know that when we talk about Africa, the market for hydrogen in Africa, there's not really a market, if you talk about that. So the market that is developing, firstly, would be from a European perspective. So we look at Europe, in particular Germany, the Netherlands, and so on. And then we also look at Asia, Japan, South Korea. You also have China and you have the US, but they will probably become to some extent self-sufficient, but those are the markets that are developing. Now, from an African perspective, if you look at policy law development, what is important is also another important development that happened last year is that as Kal'air has mentioned, 6 African countries has come together in a European country, in Spain, and they signed an MOU saying that we want to work together to ensure that we collaborate in ensuring that there's harmonization from a policy perspective, in respect of what is required from a standards perspective when we talk about the entire supply chain for hydrogen and the derivative products for hydrogen. So when we talk about derivative products, we mean ammonia, methanol, e-kerosene, and so on. So coming together to ensure that a uniform framework is developed where different countries collaborate with each other in terms of developing those frameworks. Now, when we talk about what is important, and the theme of our discussion is the commercialization of green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is the production of hydrogen from renewable sources. We can also call it renewable hydrogen. Now, what is required from a commercial perspective to make sure that Africa ultimately can tap into this vast potential market that is developing at a speed and pace, in particular to decarbonize the global economy in Europe and in Asia. So what are the pillars? The firstly is, what do we need to look at is there needs to be, and I mentioned policy and legal framework, so a clear roadmap that needs to be developed by various African jurisdictions that also speak to each other in terms of collaboration. And you can see what's happening from a South African perspective. That's already happening and has happened. So we have the Hydrogen Society roadmap that has been developed and published. We also have recently a draft commercialization strategy that was published by the South African government the end of last year, which is open for public comment, to make sure that we actually develop a framework that speaks to the commercial elements required for it. We also see what's happening in Namibia. So Namibia during COP27 also released a strategy document that speaks specifically in how they will develop their hydrogen economy, making sure that there's policy certainty, making sure there's incentives that is developed in terms of incentivizing investors to come to Namibia and set up massive large-scale projects that ultimately is for the benefit of the export market into Europe. So those are the fundamentals. And then what do you also see? There is another pillar is of the global partnerships. So global partnerships that has been developed, which is critical for the offtake, because without off-takers, in a sense, you have a commercial agreement where someone buys your product. It doesn't mean anything, because the current state of hydrogen is still, from a parity perspective, with other fossil fuels, it's still significantly expensive to use green hydrogen as opposed to fossil fuels. So you need to make sure that over time you create demand, and that's again the demand from the European market and the Asian market, and entering into contracts and salvaging partnerships with a number of stakeholders that will ultimately buy the product. The other important thing is you need to get funding. So financing of the products, financing of the infrastructure required. So that's the entire value chain. So setting up the production facility for hydrogen, the electrolyzers, the transportation, the pipelines, the port infrastructure, all of those you need funding, significant funding, in order to make sure you ultimately evacuate the product out of where you are producing it into a market, again, Europe, Asia, and so on. So there's a number of pillars, and that's why collaboration becomes very important, where it's not just about one company or an individual, it's about a multitude of companies coming with their expertise and skills, also financing houses, development financing houses, governments ensuring that all of these pillars are in place to ensure that ultimately we can make green hydrogen, or the green hydrogen economy, a reality. Without that, it will not develop. So you need a number of players to make sure this is done. And the biggest thing is the supply, but then the demand. You need to create the demand, and to make sure over time you bring down the price of or what they call the levelized cost of hydrogen. And that's also dependent on the cost of renewable energy. So if you bring down the cost of renewable energy, you bring down the cost of electrolyzers over time, and a number of studies say by 2030, you will probably get cost parity with gray hydrogen that's currently being produced. But that's obviously, it takes time. And you need all of these measures that are in place by governments, by private sectors, to make sure that we make green hydrogen a reality. Maybe just a few points before I hand over to Margo, because there is a lot to talk about on these things, is maybe specifically to mention what's happening just in Namibia. If you look at what, based on the strategy document that they've released last year, what are they intending to do this year? You can see Namibia is very active from a policy perspective. So they will probably be one of the first African jurisdictions to publish a piece of legislation. And the aim is, I think, by March, April, to publish a Synthetic Fuels Act to deal with various elements of the hydrogen industry in Namibia, from production to export to certification, and all the other things that needs to be done and be in place. You also see Namibia has proposed an implementation authority office that will deal with all investors and developers in terms of all the requirements that they would need to deal with from a regulatory contractual perspective for the government, and also to facilitate and assist them in terms of getting in touch with ultimately off-takers in Europe through the H2 Global program of the German government, and a number of other programs that is being developed in Europe and in other parts of the globe. You have the common use infrastructure concept that's being developed specifically in the Southern Corridor region in Namibia. You also have what they call, which is funding, very important, this SDG Namibia 1 program that is being developed to have blended financing, both concessional and development financing components, to ensure that you get funding for these type of projects from different sources, because these are massive infrastructure projects. Then just to lastly touch on what's happening again in South Africa, you have also the Just Energy Transition investment plan. It was published by the South African government during COP27, also to indicate what South Africa is doing to attract funding and investment into the hydrogen economy, how that needs to be developed, and how that ultimately ties into the commercial strategy in terms of making sure that all of these pillars I've mentioned earlier is ultimately achieved, and we realize the hydrogen economy for the benefit of Africa. And not to forget, one of the big things from an African perspective is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And that agreement is critical for African states and governments and the private sector ultimately to benefit from an inter-Africa trade and development perspective. And there you see the benefit between South Africa and Namibia, where the proposal is also in the southern region of Namibia, in the northern region of the Northern Cape of South Africa. There's a proposal to develop also this common use infrastructure for South Africa and Namibia, to use the common infrastructure ultimately to ensure that you then reduce the cost of producing hydrogen or its derivative products and export that either out of the port of Buffalo Bay, which is being proposed in South Africa, or the port of Lüderitz, which is being proposed, the expansion of the port of Lüderitz. There is a port in Lüderitz, but the expansion of the port of Lüderitz to deal with hydrogen products and derivative products from that. So at this point, I think let me hand over to Margo, and then we can come back to some of the points that has been raised. Margo?
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Margo-Ann Warner, a beautiful lady who is a director in environmental practice of the corporate and commercial department. Margo, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Sanya, for that very gracious introduction. And also a thank you to Hydrogen Africa for this collaboration, which is really important. This dialect must be had, and it's good that we're having it. Branching from Jackwell, who has really set the tone for me in setting out really, sort of really confirming that we have all of this enabling policy, we have these enabling plans, but how do we enable it? How do we actually make it work? Where do we start, unpacking it practically? And what are the considerations around this practical implementation that are required to realize this goal of achieving a hydrogen economy, both in South Africa and in the African region. And that's sort of what I will be unpacking in my part of this presentation, really focusing on what underpins the sustainable commercialization of green hydrogen, what is needed to ensure that the establishment of the sector is feasible, bankable, especially on the scales that we require for it to achieve what I think we all appreciate is one of the main contributors, and that being a contributor to reducing our carbon footprint and addressing the climate change crisis that we're facing globally. I will also sort of get us sort of back to reality and discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages of that might materialize as we start implementing these underlying policies, acknowledging the risks that have recently been raised by the World Economic Forum, many of which, and actually the majority of which, are environmental risks, both in the short term and long term. And then I'll also just briefly touch on what's happening on the ground in South Africa in terms of pilot projects and what we're hoping to see from these pilot projects playing out, and what the results and findings of those will be. So just to touch on with the concept of sustainable commercialization, and I think we were bombarded in 2021, 2022 with the concept of ESG, environmental, social governance, and the role it plays and the role it will continue to play in business development and economic development. But I think the nature of hydrogen and the opportunity that it presents as a sustainable energy carrier, an energy source or feedstock, fits squarely within many ESG metrics, and that the commercialization of this sector will require extensive sustainability or extensive application of sustainability principles and ESG metrics to really cross a very dynamic value chain to identify the risks and opportunities at each of these value chain points. It's such a massive matrix in which hydrogen plays a role in the production of green hydrogen in of itself, the distribution of that product, and then the utilization at each of these points where hydrogen appears. There's so much to unpack, and the risks and opportunities at each of those points need to be identified, assessed, mitigated where need be, and the opportunities taken advantage of to really just ensure that a hydrogen society and sector is achievable. So, I mean, ESG really is sort of a contributor to risk analysis, but what is important to emphasize is, or to sort of, to emphasize is that it shouldn't really just be sort of a tick box exercise and for show, that there does need to be concerted commitment to achieving the goals of addressing the risks identified in an ESG risk analysis. Really taking those actions that come from such analysis and addressing the challenges there. So as an environmental lawyer, I can quite confidently speak to sort of the environmental considerations, both opportunities and challenges that will come from establishing projects in a hydrogen economy. And what I think is to be appreciated is that there's still quite a fair amount of research and work that needs to be done to identify the impact of hydrogen itself, both in its production, its distribution, and its use. We absolutely can appreciate its, again, contribution to the decarbonization of the global economy. That really is our driving point. But we also need to be cognizant of the impact of the establishment of the infrastructure that we need to realize it. If we take it down to the production level in South Africa specifically, and to Jackwell's point about sort of the underlying policy and regulation, we have quite a robust environmental legislative framework, which is now being complemented by our energy framework. Apologies, my life. Which are now eventually speaking to each other to ensure that renewable energy projects are developed at a faster rate than what we've previously seen, because as we know, we need a fair amount of electricity production to produce hydrogen, green hydrogen, specifically at the scales that we require. South Africa, and it might be jumping around, but it's certainly one of the challenges that we will face, is facing an energy supply crisis or an electricity supply crisis. So it's probably important to appreciate that until we perhaps solve or have plans in place to resolve our specific electricity supply concerns, will we be able to really start developing energy or electricity facilities to generate green hydrogen. Although I personally think it can be done in parallel, and that one will not necessarily be reliant on the other. That is the production of green hydrogen shouldn't really be reliant on us securing or having better energy facilities in place to secure our overarching energy supply. But with that environmental legislation and energy legislation and policy, we at least have the starting ground to quite rapidly establish solar facilities and wind energy facilities to be that or part of infrastructure required to produce the green hydrogen. We have the benefit of established infrastructure, and I think we need to also consider the opportunity there. There might not necessarily be a need to have to put in place new infrastructure. We have existing infrastructure, and if we can bring that existing infrastructure back to life, and in so doing, make it more sustainable, there's also that absolute advantage that hydrogen presents. And we have a pipeline network, which the distribution of hydrogen it can be used for. That again also limits environmental impact, not having to establish an extensive distribution pipeline, which can in of itself be relatively invasive. So there's so much. There's also this consideration about implementing new infrastructure, but there's also an absolute opportunity to repurpose and, like I say, give sort of new life to existing infrastructure, which in of itself limits our environmental impact and footprint. So it's really all of these practical considerations at each step or at each point of the value chain that need to be appreciated. Again, sort of back to production, we have our energy facility, but as we know, specifically in the production of green hydrogen, there is quite a significant water supply need. And with South Africa and sort of sub-Saharan Africa being a water scarce region, we need to think about the practicalities and the consequences of the utilization or the volumes of water that might be required for the feasible production of hydrogen. We obviously have the established technology of desalination, which will certainly play a massive role in contributing towards that water supply. What works beautifully is the fact that a number of hydrogen sort of priority areas will be established at our ports, which makes the use of desalination plants more realistic, again, having to avoid implementing infrastructure to transport water to a hydrogen production site, for example. So it's sort of these nuances and assessing what we have in place and what more we need, what can be utilized or what resources need to be preserved, conserved, but are important in the process. So it's, there's so much work and assessment, I think, that still needs to be done to ensure that any risk that might arise from that can be easily mitigated, especially in relation to water supply and water quality. I think other environmental impact considerations come down to the eventual use of hydrogen, especially as a feedstock. I know currently there's a lot of thinking or talk about sort of a blended use. So certainly combining green hydrogen with other fuel sources such as natural gas, in the aviation sector, also having a blended fuel source there with hydrogen contributing a percentage there. But do we, or is it clear, and are there actual impacts of the utilization of hydrogen in that process? Have those been specifically considered and assessed? It would be unfortunate to have this source that hydrogen presents, resulting in sort of an adverse environmental impact. So in trying to address one issue, we create another, and really that's why we need holistic, practical assessment that limit that issue arising, where all good and well we are reducing our carbon footprint, but now we have perhaps created an air quality issue if particular emissions associated with hydrogen, blended hydrogen products, being consumed result in specific in increasing specific emissions, or if there's an issue around waste disposal, or what are the waste byproducts, not from the hydrogen utilization itself, because as we know, it's the actual burning of or use of the hydrogen gas. The emission there is water, but the emission processes along the value chain, again, one in terms of its production, and two, in various instances, especially there will be a combined use. Are there any waste impacts there? A waste issue that will arise eventually is one around renewable energy. How will do we have appropriate plans in place to dispose of our solar panels? Do we have appropriate waste management policies and programs and plans in place to dispose of our wind turbines? So although we have this abundant resource which we need to take advantage of for various reasons, electricity security and hydrogen production, there are other considerations around the overall impact that needs to be appreciated. I'll just pause there because I'm just to check with you, Arnes, if my connection is in order.
Yes.
Okay, great.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So because it is a little bit stalled on my side. But then I think perhaps in sort of discussing these environmental risks and considerations and the impact, have sort of taken it to sort of the next point around bankability, feasibility and bankability, because that's really very much what commercialization rests on. Are investors, are lenders, do they have the necessary security that these hydrogen projects, again at the scale that we will need to establish this new economy, have they been appropriately identified and planned for? Are the necessary action plans in place to mitigate risks along the way? Because I think we can, again, all appreciate nothing can be perfect from the outset. It's very much a work in progress, a continuous process of managing these sort of facilities. And yes, just really ensuring that there is comfort, that there won't be any risk to a return to investors looking to branch into this market and this opportunity. I'll then perhaps just move on to challenges, which I have briefly touched on from an environmental perspective, but I think sort of in the spirit of ESG, there's again a greater and greater appreciation around the social considerations. I know there's generally mainly a focus on the environmental considerations, which are vital, but there is a strong interrelation between social impact and just the emphasis around really robust stakeholder engagement. Having that sort of ESG mindset at the beginning really will facilitate the establishment of a hydrogen economy, because again, we can see, certainly in the South African government space, a huge drive to establish this. We have multiple policies and plans. We have programs in draft. We're seeing development in our environmental legislation and energy policy legislation, which will contribute to that. And it's just really to take advantage of those underlying policies, frameworks, and plans and work those into development plans, because the government will appreciate that appreciation, one. And I think the government, being a particularly material stakeholder in the hydrogen space, it will be good to sort of align developments to government's initiative. So, those sort of considerations around stakeholder engagement, from stakeholders like the government down to local communities is material, because then, of course, it mitigates the risk of challenges arising. Either, the finding that, perhaps a project is not necessarily feasible just from a cost perspective, more so than from an environmental impact perspective, or that there are challenges, whether it be scarcity of resources, particularly land resource, as we continue to see a proliferation of renewable energy. Are negotiations being conducted appropriately with landowners, with community groups, with traditional communities, with the utilization of their land, because there are real risks of legal challenges to projects arising. So again, to carry out that risk assessment of identifying where the challenges might arise from a legal challenge perspective to the implementation of a project, will take the establishment of this sector a long way, and it really is something that can no longer be ignored, and it really should be a huge focus of project development going forward. I think a really good example of the government as a stakeholder and the role that it plays can be seen in a recent development where the South African government has actually declared certain hydrogen projects, or the hydrogen sort of program, as a strategic integrated project, which means that it's sort of prioritized in terms of its development and establishment. That also facilitates expedited licensing processes, especially environmental permitting, which unfortunately is synonymous with delays. But if those can be ironed out, it really just sets up this good sort of vehicle to hopefully streamline a lot of what is required to get these projects off the ground. It really is an extensive amount of groundwork that is needed, but there are ways to especially now with the support of the government in declaring hydrogen projects and stuff, goes a long way in encouraging and facilitating the establishment of this infrastructure and this sector. Other challenges, and this sort of takes me to the point I raised in sort of my overview of this specific section, are the global risks that have recently been identified by the World Economic Forum. As I mentioned, in the short term, which is currently projected for the next 2 years, 5 of the 10 global risks fall within the environmental space. Majority of them relating to climate challenges and the risk of us not mitigating climate impact timelessly. I think what the World Economic Forum has sort of highlighted is that we have perhaps been doing too little too late. But again, although this is a risk, it might also very well be an opportunity, or we can make it an opportunity to emphasize the role that the development of a green hydrogen can play in contributing to hopefully mitigating that risk, reducing its severity both in the short term and long term. But I think there does need to be a realization that it's only hydrogen, and its role is only one input of many in addressing the climate challenge. And just again, just to speak to those World Economic Forum environmental risks, not just climate change mitigation, but are we doing enough to adapt to climate change, especially in terms of how we're going to manage, more severe weather occurrences, whether it be drought or floods, and then those very same environmental risks, when we look at the 10-year long-term review, increased to 6. And again, with there being an emphasis that we do not reach our goal of limiting an increase of the global temperature to 1.5 degrees, that we don't adapt in time, that we struggle to actually mitigate and manage the impact that will come from climate change. But the additional risk that has been added into the long term goes to biodiversity, which could also very well impact the establishment of a hydrogen sector, especially in relation to appreciating the land resource required for for the infrastructure that is required. So I think we need to just sensitize ourselves to these risks, but not the indication that a hydrogen sector is not achievable, but in fact that the establishment of a hydrogen sector can actually address these risks.
Thank you, Margo.
Thanks, Annie.
So we are now going to questions. First of all, I want to thank the speakers for their presentations. And the first question is, who are the first movers in Africa when it comes to development and production of green hydrogen? I don't have anyone specified, so you can take the question as you want.
Just again. Repeat again, Arnes. Just too soft.
Who are the first movers in Africa when it comes to development and production of green hydrogen?
So I may take it. Yeah, for me, what I can exactly say is actually the first mover in when we call about European countries or in the world is the Germans. The Germans actually, they're showing they are more pushing, I can say. They are the people that are showing more applicable actually through to the African green hydrogens. So you can see exactly most of the company actually and technology company that are based from all the basin through Namibia, either South Africa. You can see Germans are taking advantage of it. But that is not actually ignoring the others, but we say the first that has actually put the finger, it's the Germans actually. So the Germans are the most company that actually are putting their night efforts and the best knowledge to develop African green hydrogens.
Thank you. Next question. Namibia signed many contracts, including those with EU and teamed up with European Bank on the development and production of green hydrogen. What is the secret to success of Namibia and how this can replicate to other countries in Africa?
Maybe take it or partially take it.
You want to take it, Jack?
Yeah, I can. We can share it.
I can add on.
Okay, please. I think when we talk about the success, so at this stage of there's a lot that the big thing is the support of the Namibian government, the full support of the Namibian government from national to regional to the city in terms of driving the agenda under the Harambee Prosperity Plan to say that we're going to make a green hydrogen a reality because we've identified the fact that we are endowed with natural resources in the form of solar iteration and also wind resources. And we can produce green hydrogen at cost parity, probably at $1.50 a kg. So that's the big thing. And then you see the support also of the German government at Kal'air, as mentioned, all over in terms of various programs, pilot projects that has been launched in Walvis, whether from a rail perspective, whether from production of ammonia perspective, and then also the hyphen and streamlining legislation. So as I mentioned, they will probably be the first country to have a fully fledged act that deals with the entire value chain of hydrogen. But it doesn't discount what other countries has done. And if you look at what South Africa has done, actually there's a much more deeper industry in terms of green hydrogen and the development of green hydrogen and hydrogen in particular. So I would balance it to say, yes, Namibia has done a lot, but South Africa has actually done much more.
Thank you.
So that's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, that's I just want to add something like that actually.
Please.
It was actually, from Namibia perspective, they planned their policy away in advance. And Namibia started talking about their green hydrogen. Their voice was out there before other countries, before when I talk about the southern region, before South Africa. South Africa was already developed, but they was not talking loud. But Namibia, when it came, it played better roles in terms of its policies and their awareness. They tried their best to introduce hydrogen to all communities by the Arambos. that all that communities, they form the leaders, from the traditional leader, S.A. Margo. All those legal aspects Namibia was taking care already in advance to make sure people to understand what is the green hydrogen we produce for their country, what is the benefit, what is the advantage of what the government want to plan, and they involve directly the public and the private sector to work together. They create a committee. South Africa, yes, there's all potential. South Africa is great. Everything is there. Mineral resources, metal, steel, water, everything is there in South Africa to do the best. Renewable energy we can do. We can produce solar, we can do everything. But the voice are not there. That was the most reason Hydrogen Africa was coming into South Africa to say, no, guys, we love to push you guys. We have strategy. We know what to do in South Africa. We know we need to end of doing a talk show. We need to go to practical. What is the practical? Is what Hydrogen Africa are trying to maintain in South Africa right now. We have many strategies, but we cannot avoid everything. We're looking for government to approach us. One government will knock to Hydrogen Africa door. With our team, we have partners. CDH is there. We have other partners. We bring all our partner guys to the table of the president and his committee. We say, that is what we should do. The process must stop doing around his visit to the other climate or economic climate. You need to focus more about green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is the future. And South Africa is the frontier of green hydrogen. That's what people should know. Government should know about it. Involve NGOs, NPOs, private sectors, academic together so we can push green hydrogen. People to understand that. I said to you last time, Arnes, today, if you go to South Africa, go even to UCity or to Stellenbosch University or to UP, UJ, ask people the question regarding green hydrogen, where green hydrogen is coming from, who's producing green hydrogen in Africa, what is South Africa's role in the green hydrogen among all those 9 countries that was mentioned. Even students are sitting on the chemical industry, they won't know about it. Even engineers, they won't give you the proper answers. Why? I have a team I sent to Northern Cape to just get the rumors regarding the green hydrogen. People in that community, they don't know exactly what the green hydrogen is. They don't know exactly what green hydrogen will produce for them. But this is our life. It's our future. We talk about SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal 17. What it says, it's a partnership for all. So South Africa must act on it. Like Namibia is our example. Egypt also, in the mainland side, Egypt also is our example. Good example is also Egypt. But we talk, as we are living on the southern side, we're talking about Namibia. South Africa must do. South Africa is a big brother from Namibia. Don't leave your young brother beating you at advance. You are a big brother. Stand up and move. Make the reality of the country. Let's bring the economy of the country to boost. So that's what I keep saying.
Thank you. Jackwell, aside from EU, what other regions might be the off-takers of hydrogen from Africa?
I understand your question is you're saying what other countries would potentially be off-takers. Network is a bit unstable. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
The other off-takers, when we look at the various analysis that has been done either by the International Energy Agency and also a number of other agencies in respect of demand, where we look at, yes, most countries can produce green hydrogen, but it's about the cost of production and how self-sufficient you can become. The other regions, so Europe is the obvious in terms of Germany, a number of other jurisdictions in Europe. But then you also have South Korea and Japan, who's heavily investing in hydrogen in various value chains, more in particular from a mobility perspective. And if you look at the demand cycle over the next 10 to 20 years, Japan and South Korea will probably become one of the biggest net importers of green hydrogen or its derivative products in the form of a sustainable aviation fuel, ammonia, and ethanol. Other jurisdictions where there would also be capacity, but I think that's more longer term because they will become more self-sustainable because of their own resources. So the US will probably be to a large extent self-sustainable, and but there will be room for exports and imports, and also China. So China over time will probably also import products, but I think for the immediate future, the biggest markets remain Europe and then South Korea, Japan, those are the markets that has been identified by a number of experts.
Thank you. Margo, how important is to mobilize private sector investments for development of green hydrogen in Africa?
Simple answer would really be very important. I think the private sector would be key to establishing this sector. The private sector has the expertise. The private sector has the knowledge, the research, the innovation. So their role would be material. We see the positive outcomes of the private sector in our electricity sector, where we have independent power producer programs, and the role that they've played there. And I think it would be a very similar role that would need to be played out to realize this.
Thank you, Margo. To what extent has the Africa been involved in the establishment of the rollout of hydrogen? Jackwell.
So in terms of when we talk about hydrogen, so if we talk about production in South Africa currently, so most of the production is gray hydrogen, and most of the production of hydrogen actually in South Africa is currently being done by Sasol at its plants in Gauteng. From a green hydrogen perspective, there's no facility that is yet commissioned as far as I'm aware of, and as far as I could establish. So all of those are still pipeline projects that some of them are touted to be active by next year, as early as next year, and some by 2025. So there's no green hydrogen production still yet happening, but there is a lot of gray hydrogen being produced by companies like Sasol. It is often used into their own feedstock or for the production of ammonia. Maybe Kal'air can also add to that, and Margo.
Thank you. And we'll wrap this up with the last question. How green hydrogen will impact current energy consumption in Africa? Margo, maybe?
So I think the impact will be eventually quite significant. Green hydrogen will start replacing the use of gray hydrogen, or start replacing the production of gray hydrogen, as we're already seeing. So there's that benefit there. When it's used as an actual fuel stock, we'll see how it will benefit other sectors such as the steel and cement industries, and those industries becoming more sustainable, with those products actually being certified as green. Even the agricultural sector with the production of green ammonia, and just sort of energy use being so broad, and there being so many distinctions of it. From an electricity perspective, again, there is the real possibility of hydrogen being a facilitator in us maintaining a baseload source of energy, which South Africa is currently looking towards, obviously transitioning away from coal. Gas has been identified, especially LPG and LNG, have been identified as replacement sources to enable baseload supply. But hydrogen, being again of a gaseous nature, and the infrastructure or the technology of gas facilities will be able to utilize hydrogen. Hydrogen also presents a real opportunity to serve as a baseload electricity source, fuel stock. So I think all around, it is a real opportunity for, again, sustainability amongst so many industries: the energy sector, the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector, from an energy perspective.
Thank you, Margo. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is it for today. I hope you are satisfied with what you heard today, and that this information will serve your businesses in Africa. If you want to connect with speakers, please reach out to us and we'll take care that you get the info. I want to thank our speakers for memorable presentations, and thank you for your attention, and hope to see you soon. Of course, live here on YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, enjoy your weekend.